Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be discussing how I prepared for the IMAT. Now this video is going to be basically my personal experience with it, as well as tips and tricks that I've gathered from interviewing and talking to dozens and hundreds of students over the last 5 years. But this is going to be the first video in a series of videos and articles about preparation for the IMAT, because it's been 5 years since I've done it, the format has changed, so I want to actually also ask people who also scored a lot better than me, but also who did it a lot more recently. We can really bring you a lot of good information on how you prepare, especially for the heroes of Padua. Once they're done with their exams, they're going to be able to give us a lot better information than I ever could. But regardless, today what we're going to discuss is, first of all, the general strategy that I would recommend. Second, my personal situation. So what timing did I have? What was my foundation and what my score was? I'm going to briefly go over each of the sections and how to prepare for them. Then we're going to move on to what sources I would recommend, including do I recommend any courses? And then finally, we're going to talk briefly about the most important considerations that most students just seem to ignore for some reason. So starting with the general strategy that I recommend is to focus on your strengths and then plan for your weaknesses. And the most important thing to consider here is how much time do you have left until the IMAT? At the time of the recording, there is 8 months left to the IMAT. There's absolutely no reason why you shouldn't be able to do the entire syllabus and cover it and prepare for every single part of it, okay? But if you have, 2 weeks left and physics is your absolute worst, you can't do any maths, then it's probably not worth trying to, recover a few marks from physics. What you should do in that case is maximize what your best areas are. So depending on how much time you have left, you should be able to cover everything. And while you are covering everything, you should be testing yourself continuously. So it's not just enough to do the past papers and then, once you get something wrong, you just oh, okay, whatever, and then move on to the next question. Or when you're studying and you're constantly reading this new material, there's no point in you just continuously going through the entire syllabus and not testing yourself at all. So as you cover everything, which you really should be covering everything in the syllabus, again, there's so much time left, you should be continuously testing yourself. Before you start a new chapter, you should go and test yourself on, BMAT questions on that topic and see, how much do you know? It's okay if you haven't started, you haven't done any study, you need to start somewhere. Studies have shown that if you actually test yourself before you even start learning, it is actually very advantageous, because then once you start studying, you'll recall the questions and the stems and see how they want you to think about learning the material. So you should be continuously testing yourself, and you should be covering all of the material, again focusing in on your strengths and trying to bring up your weaknesses as much as possible. The next one is that you should really use the past questions strategically. So if there are 10 past exams and you have 20 weeks, what you should do is you should every single week sit one of the exams starting from number 1 to number 10 in exact test conditions. Okay, I'm talking you go into a room, you have a clock, you don't bring your phone in, you have the paper printed out, you have a timer, you have I'm talking exact same conditions every single week. And you do that twice if you have 20 weeks. If you only have 10 weeks, then you do one every single week. We don't know yet if the exam, what day of the week is going to be or what date it's going to be, but generally, if you know the exam is on a Thursday, every Thursday from now until the exam, you should do a past exam, okay? Every time you finish a past exam, you need to go through the questions and see what topics you got wrong. And when you see what you got wrong, you don't just move on. You go and you restudy that entire thing, right? You see why you got it wrong. If you were to do that again, do you understand how to get it correctly? Don't just check what was the correct answer, And then once you do 2 or 3 weeks in a row, compare each of the questions you're getting wrong. Is it always in one particular topic? Is it always genetics and biology? Because that shows that fundamentally you are not understanding, you are not grasping something if you're consistently getting genetics questions wrong. This is going to show your weakness, and depending on how much time you have, you can redo all of genetics from the start. The other thing is, once you start doing all of the past papers and you do all of them before you actually get to the IMAT date itself, you're going to see that there are types of questions that are continuously repeating themselves, And in this way, you can identify what are the high yield topics. There's this thing called the Pareto principle, which pretty much says that 80% of the results comes from 20% of the material, because they're just constantly repeating question types, repeating topics. And so the more experience you have using the past paper strategically, the better you can tackle the high yield thing, which is going to get you most of the points. Next is you need to understand basic MCQ strategies, because the IMAT not only is testing your knowledge, it's actually testing your strategy as well. If you think about it logically, you only have to answer half of the questions correctly, only half of the questions correctly, to guarantee yourself a spot in most of the universities. Okay? If you get no other questions wrong and you answer half of them correctly, you will get a score that will pretty much get you into most universities, except for the top ones. The thing is though, most students don't understand how to approach this exam strategically. So they start guessing things, they start like just answering things, they don't do timing drills, they don't understand how it works like probability wise. For example, if you are in the middle of a test and a question is taking too long, do you just guess like one out of the 5 answers? Do you just guess one? Or is it better to try to eliminate 2 and then take a guess? You have to like make up a strategy. You need to like research these strategies and have one before you go into the exam. Because again, the IMAT is not only testing your knowledge, it's testing your knowledge under pressure. The other thing that you have to get good at is timing, okay? Every single year, 2 things that I see most often is people are crying because they weren't paying attention while they were filling out the answer sheet, and one thing slid and their entire grid is down, which means that basically all of their answers are going to be invalid. And 2, they didn't have time to finish the test. Okay, now I'm not saying why someone might not have time to finish the test, but most of the time I'm willing to bet is because they didn't have a strategy from all of the past times they did it, okay? They didn't go into it knowing, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try every question sequentially, and then I'm going to go back over the ones I wasn't sure. Or maybe you want to be like, okay, I'm going to start from my strongest section where I can secure the most points, and then I'll go over my weak things. The thing is, there is no like one right ultimate strategy, but the point is that you need to have a strategy before you go in, and you need to not change in the middle of the exam. Okay, you don't change the horse that you're betting on during the race or something. There's some very important phrase like that you don't change the horse that you're betting on halfway through the race, and that is so important. So you need to be continuously running timing drills. You need to come up with a strategy, and you need to be able to get yourself to read a question and know if you're going to be able to solve it under a certain time. Like if you look at that question and you think it's going to take you 5 minutes to eliminate one answer, it is not worth it. You need to skip that question, because again, you technically only have to answer half of the questions correctly to get into somewhere. Okay, MCQ strategies, time drills, doing past questions, all of these are so important in creating your IMAT strategy, which is what's going to get you in. So understanding the strategies better is also going to help you understand whether you should risk answering a question or not. And the final thing that I wanted to mention in the strategy thing is that a lot of the questions that they ask and they repeat actually have like tricks and tips to solving them, especially the section 1 questions. There are almost always shortcuts to answering certain types of questions. Now, there is a really good logical reasoning book, which I'm going to put the link in the description and in the first comment. And this book teaches you a lot of the really good strategies on how to approach logical reasoning. Because again, like a lot of question types, including also in the maths and chemistry section that seem very complicated, there's usually a simple tip or a simple trick that allows you to shortcut answering the question. So these are all things that you're only going to learn by continuously doing question types. And when you answer a question incorrectly, not just looking at what the correct one was, but understanding why you got it incorrectly and what was the exact thing you needed to do to actually get it correctly. Okay, all of this builds into a very solid strategy. And these are all the things that I did for my personal situation. So talking about my personal situation, my score was 48.6 because this is like one of the most asked questions I get. I prepared for the exam in exactly 2 months. I had 2 full months to prepare for it because before that I was in full-time employment. I was out of high school, I think like 4 years at this stage. I was like working in Facebook actually, and I decided to quit my job. I think it was like mid-June. I had to serve out my notice. I started mid-July preparing, and I sat the exam in mid-September. And the reason, my score isn't excellent. It's definitely not like in the 60s or 50s like a lot of people, but I feel like my score is pretty good considering I only studied for 2 months. And the reason my score, I feel, was really good was because I had a very solid very solid strategy going in. I'm gonna try holding him and see if that helps. I sat this exam with also a lot of other people I know that tried this exam afterwards who are also like a lot smarter than me. I didn't get the score because I'm intelligent or not. I'm actually quite dumb. Like I'm dumb as rocks. And these were the students who were explaining concepts. Like these friends are the people who were explaining things to me before we would go into tests in high school together. But the reason why I got higher scores than them is not because I'm smarter than them. It's just because I went in with a clearer strategy, a clearer mind, and I was feeling a lot more confident going in that day. So again, I cannot emphasize enough how important your strategy is. Now, I'm pretty happy with the way I prepared. However, I would like to point out that I did not actually know how to study back then. I'm pretty sure if I had 2 months now to study for the exam, I would like get a much higher score, because I didn't exactly know how to study then. I was just really strategic about my preparation. The thing that I would do differently this time around is 100% using flashcards. I did not understand the value of flashcards until like my second year of medical school, which I highly regret. So the one thing I would do differently is 100% to start using flashcards more effectively. And the second one is using question banks from other tests. Because when I was preparing for it, I think there were only 6 past papers, which was fine because I only had 2 months to prepare. But I have heard from a lot of people that the BMAT questions are actually very similar. So if I was doing it differently now, I would definitely use flashcards, and I would definitely use like BMAT question banks. And there's apparently a really good book, which again, I will link this all in the description for you. So that's what I would do differently, because otherwise when I came up with my solid like strategy of comparing my test results like week after week and seeing what areas I was getting incorrectly, and finding a timing drill and my MCQ like risk tolerance, like what's the probability I would solve a question, what are the tips and tricks to each type of question. The only thing I would actually do differently is use flashcards and use question banks. Now I'm going to briefly go over each of the sections and like just very briefly talk about it, because again, we're having like a lot more detailed guides and a lot more expert people talk about this than I am going to. But briefly, let's talk about each of the sections and what's a good way to prepare for each of the parts. So starting with logical reasoning and general knowledge, really, I got full marks on logical reasoning, and that's because I came from a test that I sat when I was a teenager called the HPAT, which is in Ireland, which is logical reasoning on steroids. So the only way to prepare for the HPAT for that is to just keep solving questions and to really use that Cambridge book. Like, it is really so good. But there are also other resources, because the question types again are repeated. So the best way to prepare for logical reasoning is use that book, use the past questions, and learn these like tips and tricks and strategies, like understand what the question is asking for you. If you're really interested, I could like over the next few months try to throw together a logical reasoning guide. But I'm not sure. So maybe let me know in the comments, because I'm kind of hesitant to do preparation materials. But if that's something that you really want, please let me know, because logical reasoning is actually the one part that I feel very confident about. But again, the whole thing comes literally down to what are the question types? What is the question asking for you? What is the strategy? That's all. General knowledge, the truth is, there's not really a lot you can do for general knowledge. Like, it's called general knowledge for a reason. It's not something that you can cram for. Now, one of the heroes of Padova, Vinny, he got, I think, basically a perfect general knowledge score. I don't remember. And he has very kindly agreed to let me interview him for the podcast. And this is great. So he's going to give you a lot better advice than I would. But I think a fun way to prepare for general knowledge would be to play those trivia games. You know, the ones you can get on your phone and it asks you like Trivia Pursuit and things like that. Like, I think if, there is no real way to cram for it, but I think if you wanted something like a fun pastime way to prepare for it, I think playing trivia games like on one of those apps could be fun. Second is just reading in general. And 3, there are some high yield topics, like they do tend to love like European history and politics and, some cultural like arts and media and things like that. So there are some ways that you could maximize how you prepare for it. But in my experience, there is no way to cram general knowledge, because again, it's just like basically how you've lived, how active reader you are, how like do you keep up events and history and things like that. Now, I might be completely wrong. I am very happy to wait for Vinny to actually give us the real strategy and see if there is a tip or trick to it. But generally, I think you can't cram for it, so there's no point in like wasting any time or emotional energy trying to prepare for it. I think the best way is just play the games on the app and just, read Wikipedia pages about like NATO and the EU and the Parliament and, these other like world organizations like WHO and UNESCO and things like that, because yeah, I think that's the only way really you're going to maximize your chances. There's no way to really cram for it. Next is biology. Now, there's this like interesting pyramid thing that I saw where like biology, chemistry, and physics and maths, the way you prepare for each of them actually is completely opposite. So for example, biology is basically a brute memorization type of subject. There is some level of understanding that will help you solve questions, but in general, biology is a very brute memorization. And so this is where things like flashcards and diagrams with image occlusion, this is like where that is going to come in the most handy, because biology is generally like, you know it or you don't, that's it. Now, when it comes to chemistry, it's kind of in between biology and physics, where there are certain like ways to learn how to solve questions, but a lot of it is also like brute memorization. It's kind of in between memorizing and solving. And then physics is basically like just solving, just learning how to solve. Now, research has shown that just solving maths and physics questions is actually a very, very effective way to learn it, but that doesn't actually really work for biology. For biology, it's honestly just self-testing, it's using flashcards, and it's just brute memorization. Now, there are certain things where you need to conceptually understand, like, for example, you know, when you're solving the little Mendelian squares, the Punnett squares, that sure to a certain degree is just memorization, but that is also understanding. So biology, use flashcards, use diagrams, understand concepts so that, you know, it's easier to memorize them. When it comes to chemistry, again, like I see people being like, should I memorize every value in the periodic table? Like, no, of course not. That is not what they're asking at all. But there are certain things that you should like brute memorize, like the properties of, you know, the first column and the second one and the third one, and like what are like the different blocks and what, you know, like these are things that you should learn, but also you need to practice solving things like redox equations. And wow, it has been so long since I've done chemistry, but like Le Chatelier's principle and, you know, the acid-base equations, you need to practice, and also make sure that you are memorizing the right amount of information. So for chemistry, just keep practicing, do flashcards for like, you know, the properties of things and, you know, certain values, and maybe even like the steps to how to solve an equation, but then you need to actually apply that by solving equations and trying lots of past papers and understanding where you're going wrong and right and other things like that. When it comes to physics, it is literally just solve. That's it. Like literally all research has shown that homework is basically a very useless tool. Like more and more research in academia is showing that homework is actually very, very ineffective, except in the case of maths. Maths is the only place where it's shown that actually continuously solving questions by yourself is actually a very effective way to learn it. Now, the other thing is, when you look at the past papers of the IMAT, especially at the maths and physics section, there are question types that they love to repeat. So even if you hate maths and physics, right, you can just find out what the 20% of the syllabus they're asking for 80% of the marks. And then you just keep solving that question type. You come up with a strategy, you come up with, you know, like if they're asking the one with the balance and, you know, the gravity, and it's been a while since I've done these, but you know the exact question I'm talking about. You need to come up with a system like, okay, first write down forces, then write up forces. You need to come up with a strategy, and the only way you're going to do this is just by continuously solving questions. Now, physics literally has the least amount of points in the entire paper. So personally, I would just focus on the high yield stuff. But again, you have a lot of time. So yeah, that's basically a very quick commentary on each section. But, you know, I might be completely wrong. I might be completely dumb. It has been 5 years since I've done this. So I'm looking forward to other more knowledgeable and higher score people to actually correct me on this, hopefully. So next is, what resources would I recommend? First of all, YouTube. I really think YouTube is your best friend. There is nothing on the internet these days that we cannot learn for free. And I think there are great channels out there that will teach you anything you need to know about any single subject. So ones that I particularly remember that I really liked, also maybe in my first year of medical school, was the chemistry tutor. I'm not a huge fan of Khan Academy. I know, unpopular opinion, I'm actually not a huge fan, but I do remember they had like 1 or 2 golden videos that really helped me in, you know, their sea of 10,000 videos. So a little bit Khan Academy. Crash Course was amazing. I loved Crash Course. Like, just, you know, when I was sitting eating breakfast, sometimes I would watch 1 or 2 of their videos and be like, oh, I remember learning this. Ah, okay. And like, it would just like bring everything together, and it was like such a like a rapid digestive format. And the final one is AK Lectures. Now, I discovered AK Lectures in my first year, but I find that like he's like a really, really great lecturer. So AK Lectures for sure. I think like these YouTube channels, and I'm sure in the last 5 years, many more and amazing ones have popped up, but these are the main YouTube channels that I would recommend. When it comes to the books, I really, really recommend that Cambridge one, the logical reasoning one, which again, I'll put in the description. And generally, when we're talking about science books that we recommend, we always recommend the Cambridge A-level ones. And the reason for this is because the exam, the IMAT exam, is prepared by Cambridge, right? And it's meant to be similar to like a UK Italian level of syllabus. So a lot of the questions they use are going to be in the format that they prepared their own exams. So I really feel like their own books are logically the best ones to prepare from. When I was preparing, I didn't quite use the Cambridge books. I used my books from Ireland, including my high school notes. And then when I noticed that there was a gap from my Irish syllabus, because I was getting questions wrong, I would then go onto Wikipedia, I would go onto YouTube, and if very necessary, I would then open an A-level book and see what was missing. And generally, I would find exactly the thing that I got wrong, exactly in the A-level book. So I think that's a really good strategy. And those are generally the resources that I recommend, as well as now the BMAT book. Now, I didn't use this when I was preparing, but again, it was 5 years ago. I had a very limited amount of time and it just wasn't an option for me. But now I have heard hundreds of students, literally when I was talking to the first years, almost all of them said that they use this BMAT 700 book to prepare. So I would really also recommend that on top of using the Cambridge A-level books. And the YouTube channels, Wikipedia, I don't think there's anything else that I would is particularly jumping out about me. The final thing I want to touch on is courses. I get asked all the time if I would recommend an IMAT course, and I'm going to try to word this delicately, but I have not yet heard of a course that people have been happy about, is all I'm going to say. And I think, if you go on to especially the medical school subreddit, which I'm also a mod on, you can, if you search up the IMAT course reviews and things like that, you will find reviews, again, that are pages long speaking about them. And after reading on these, which I never comment on, I just cannot, with a clean conscience, recommend any courses. That's all I'm going to say about it. Personally, I do not recommend any courses, not because I personally have experience with it. I just have not heard of one that people came out of being yes, I really felt it was worth the money. So personally, I don't recommend any courses. I know dozens, hundreds of students. I would actually say I don't know that many students that use the course and were happy with it. And finally, the most important things that students never, ever, ever want to follow. I don't know why. Don't chase a certain score, but chase doing your best, okay? And I know this sounds really, really counterintuitive, but if you keep aiming on, I'm going to get a 60, I want to get a 60, that's my whole plan, and I'm going to get 60 because a 60 is going to be enough, that is a really bad strategy to have, because if you get in on the day and the questions are particularly hard and you have your mindset that you're going to get the 60, you're going to start panicking and trying to answer more questions so you can get higher points instead of minimizing the incorrect answers you're going to get, okay? Especially because I get the question all the time, is X score enough? We don't know, because I feel a lot of people don't understand how the scoring in the IMAT works. If I get 80, but everyone else in the universities I apply to got 81, it means I won't get in with an 80. So it doesn't matter what score I'm aiming for. What I need to aim for is doing my best and answering as many questions correctly. And I know it kind of sounds like the same thing, but I guarantee you it is not. Because if I'm going in with the idea and the attitude that I'm going to answer as many correctly, when I'm sitting down and I'm reading a question, I'm going to be a lot more cool and logical. Am I able to answer this correctly? Probably not. Okay, maybe I'll come back to it later. Versus, okay, I need to get a 60, which means I need to get this many correct, and which means, okay, I'm going to answer every single one of these correct, and if it's not correct, I'm going to guess, okay? And I know this is a really, really subtle difference, but the people who understand the difference, is going to, I promise you it makes a huge difference if you approach it with a process focused, a process oriented focus versus a outcome dependent focus. So this is the first thing. Don't chase a result or don't chase a score, just really chase doing your best. And I know it sounds cliche, but you can only control your income. You can't control the outcome. Second, confidence is key, right? When you go in on the day, you want to be as confident and cool and collected as you can be. You don't want to start panicking and rushing and then fill out your questionnaire incorrectly or skip a question or, get thrown off by one bad question and then you don't have time to solve the other ones. So confidence is key. And I don't mean you need to fake it, you're going to be yeah, I'm going to go in and I'm going to answer every single one correctly. But, just sitting and telling yourself okay, I have done an exam every single week in exact exam conditions. This is no different. There is no reason for me to be anxious. I'm just going to go in and I'm going to look at all the questions and see how it goes, right? Because then when you sit down and you see a really hard question, you're going to be wow, okay, probably everyone is finding this question hard. Okay, maybe I'll come back to it. Or you know what, maybe I'll just try it. But if you are confident and you are calm and you're collected and you realize that every week you have prepared for this, and maybe you didn't prepare to 100%, but realizing that like you're the only teammate you have in that situation is really, like, I think in a way relieving, and you're not going to panic as much. And when you walk out of the exam, for better or for worse, I promise you're going to feel a lot better, because when you're sitting there's nothing you can change. You can't change, oh, I should have done this and I should have done that. Yeah, but you didn't, so there's no point in hating yourself. You just have to work with yourself from that point on. And I swear, like, confidence and faking it till you make it, to a certain degree, is going to make the world of difference, because you're not going to panic and you're going to be able to like think a lot more clear and calculated and strategically. And now the final point, because this is turning into a documentary, is you need to look after your body. And I understand no one wants to think that like sleep and nutrition and exercise is that important, but there's a reason why everyone preaches it to you. Like, if you look into any sort of like learning physiology or the neuroscience behind it, like almost all of them will point out to the fact that you need to have good sleep, you need to have good nutrition, and you need to exercise consistently. Now, if you only have 2 weeks to study for the exam, it's probably not a great time to start running a marathon every single day, but depending on how much time you have, I think starting to cut out sugar, making sure you get 8 hours of sleep a night, and just like going for like even an hour's walk every single day, because again, like studies have shown that exercise in particular releases something called BDNF, which is brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is basically growth hormone for the neurons in your brains, okay? Sleep is the only time memory consolidation happens. When you are sleeping, it is the only time you can process your memories and actually consolidate them and understand how to use that information. So when you're thinking, oh, I'll just stay up late, or oh, I'll just pull an all-nighter and I'll just study more, yeah, that's like actually the worst thing you can do, because your memories are not going to consolidate. So exercise, sleep, and usually nutrition ties it all together. If you have a really bad diet and you're like feeling like crappy and lethargic all the time, it's not going to help with your sleep, it's not going to help to exercise. So I'm not saying like you have to only eat salads, but I'm saying like cutting back on the processed foods you eat, I promise you will make a huge, huge, huge difference. So that being said, that kind of ties up my general advice for the exam. Again, this is like us like covering 10% of it. Like this is only the start. People who are way smarter than me, people who have scored way better, are going to give you way better guides. So until then, I would really recommend that you sign up for the newsletter, or follow us on Instagram, or turn on your notifications, because this is all coming and I don't want you guys to miss it. And yeah, happy studying.